I want to start today with a question, and I want you to sit with it for a second before I answer it. When was the last time you heard the words state of emergency and immediately thought, wildfire? Not tornado, not hurricane, not blizzard, wildfire. Because on April 21st, 2026, 4 days ago, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp declared a state of emergency for 91 counties in response to ongoing fires and drought conditions, freeing up resources and allowing for state National Guard troops to be deployed to the affected areas. A family in Brantley County lost their home entirely. Brittany Quinn grabbed her daughter, her animals, and anything she could carry and left. About 30 minutes later, she checked her surveillance cameras and the house was in flames. "Now we have nothing to go to but rubbish," she said. "How are we going to recover from this?" 91 counties in Georgia under a wildfire state of emergency. While the national conversation has been entirely consumed by tornadoes and squall lines and flood warnings across the Midwest, we have not seen conditions like this in Georgia in living memory. And that sentence, "We haven't seen this in over a year," is the title of this video. But I want to be honest with you right now. The over a year part of that title is me being conservative. Because what the data is actually showing, when you look at the full picture of what is happening to this country's weather and climate right now, is something we haven't seen in far longer than a year. In some cases, we haven't seen it in a decade. In some cases, in our lifetimes. And in one case, the one that I think is the most alarming, the most undercovered, and the most consequential story in American weather right now, we haven't seen it since 1934. Today is Wednesday, April 28th, 2026. And today I'm going to step back from the tornado coverage, which I will return to because the severe weather threat is still very real this week, and tell you the full story of what is actually happening to this country. Because it is bigger and more interconnected than most people realize. And it starts with a number. Here is the number that stopped me cold this week. The number that puts everything, the Georgia wildfires, the Western water crisis, the active tornado season, the building El Niño, into a single, coherent, terrifying context. NOAA's comprehensive Palmer Drought Severity Index hit its highest level for March since records started in 1895, and last month was the third driest month recorded regardless of time of year. It trailed only the famed Dust Bowl months of July and August 1934. The third driest month in the entire 131-year record of American climate data. Not the driest spring month. The third driest month ever recorded. Any month, any season, any year, trailing only 2 months from the Dust Bowl, from 1934, from the era of the grapes of wrath, from the era when the Oklahoma and Texas panhandles literally turned into a desert, when families loaded everything they owned into wagons and drove west, when topsoil blew off farms in walls of darkness that people called black blizzards. We are in drought conditions that, in terms of severity, are approaching within touching distance of the worst months of the American Dust Bowl from 1934, from the era of the grapes of wrath, or from the era when the Oklahoma and Texas panhandles literally turned into a desert, when families loaded everything they owned into wagons and drove west, when topsoil blew off farms in walls of darkness that people called black blizzards. We are in drought conditions that, in terms of severity, are approaching within touching distance of the worst months of the American Dust Bowl. And I don't think most people understand that, because the Dust Bowl is history. It is a chapter in school textbooks. It is Ken Burns documentaries and Dorothea Lange photographs. It is something that happened to other people, in another era, in a country that didn't have modern agricultural technology, or weather forecasting, or federal disaster relief. But the physics of drought does not care about our agricultural technology. The physics of drought does not care about the year on the calendar. When the Palmer Drought Severity Index reads a number that only 2 months in 131 years of records have exceeded, both of them in the summer of 1934, that means the land is in a state of moisture stress that we genuinely have not seen in the lifetimes of everyone watching this video. Precipitation for the continental U.S. as a whole was less than 70% of average from January through March, which ranks as the lowest in records dating to 1895. The previous record was set in 1910, the driest January through March in 131 years of records, breaking a record that was set in 1910, a record that had stood for 116 years. And now I need to connect that number to something specific and immediate, because the drought is not abstract. It is not a chart. It is not a satellite image of brown land. It is Brittany Quinn standing in front of her surveillance camera watching her house burn. It is 91 Georgia counties under a wildfire emergency. It is a ranch in Walden, Colorado, where the stock pond has gone completely dry. It is a family business built over generations that cannot plant this spring because the soil is too parched to sustain a crop. Let me spend time on Georgia specifically, because I think it represents the most dramatic and underreported dimension of what is happening to this country's weather right now. Crews are battling fires across multiple counties in Georgia, including the Pineland Road fire in southeastern Georgia's Clinch County near the Florida border. A home and vehicles in Brantley County were destroyed by wildfire on April 21st, Georgia, burning. In April, while the national conversation is about tornadoes in Missouri and Oklahoma, over 99% of the Southeast is experiencing some level of drought. It would take 19 inches of rain in 1 month to break the drought in eastern Texas, and more than a foot of rain to solve the deficit for most of the Southeast, according to NOAA. 19 inches of rain in 1 month. To break the eastern Texas drought, for context, the wettest month ever recorded in Houston, the rainiest major city in America, was 4 inches. The average April rainfall for the entire state of Georgia is about 5 inches. For most of the Southeast to recover its moisture deficit, it would need to receive 3 to 4 times its average monthly rainfall, sustained over weeks, just to get back to baseline. That is not a forecast. That is a description of a hole so deep that normal weather cannot fill it. The Southeast drought is not going to be fixed by a few rounds of severe thunderstorms. It is not going to be fixed by one wet week in May. It has been building since last fall, through the driest winter on record, through a March that was the warmest in 132 years, through an April that has seen the region's soil moisture continue to decline, even as tornado outbreaks were hitting Missouri and Wisconsin. A climatologist with the National Drought Mitigation Center noted that a different drought, connected to the jet stream keeping storms further north, has put the South from Texas all the way to the East Coast into a separate drought that just happens to coincide with what is going on in the West. 2 separate droughts, one in the West, driven by record heat, record low snowpack, and the collapse of the normal Pacific storm track. One in the South and East, driven by a jet stream that has been keeping moisture-bearing storm systems too far north to deliver meaningful rain to the southern tier. 2 entirely different meteorological causes, both producing drought conditions approaching historic extremes, both happening at the same time. Wildfire conditions across the Southeast have been driven by record heat and below normal precipitation through the first quarter of 2026. Wildfires have been intense, burning more than 6 million acres in the first quarter of 2026 nationally, more than double the average for January through March over the past decade, more than double the average wildfire acreage for the first quarter of the year nationally, and that number includes January and February, before the March heat wave made conditions dramatically worse. The Georgia wildfire crisis is not a regional anomaly. It is the southeastern expression of a national drought emergency that is operating at a severity level this country has not experienced since the early 20th century, and it is happening while everyone is watching the tornado radar. Now, let me take you to the other drought, the western drought, because the numbers here are, if anything, even more alarming. The vapor pressure deficit, a measure of how much moisture the hot, dry air is sucking up from the land, is 77% above normal and more than 25% higher than the previous record for January through March in the West, 25% higher than any previous record for moisture extraction from the western landscape. The atmosphere over the western United States is pulling moisture out of the soil, out of vegetation, out of rivers and lakes at a rate that has never been measured before in the January through March period. This is not climate projections. This is not a model output. This is a measured, observed, present tense fact about what is happening to the American West right now. Every major river basin and state in the West is experiencing a snow drought, according to NOAA's National Integrated Drought Information System. Snowpack levels on April 1st are a key indicator of the amount of water that will trickle down through rivers and into reservoirs. Low snowpack can make wildfire-prone land even more vulnerable. Every major river basin, not most, not many, everyone, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and Utah are contending with record low snowpack. Snowpack is the accumulation of mountain snow that fortifies rivers, reservoirs, and drinking water systems once it melts. Record low snowpack in 4 states simultaneously. The Colorado River Basin's snowpack, which I described in a previous video as being tied with 2015 for all-time record lows in the SNOTEL data record, is the water supply backbone for 7 states and approximately 40 million people. Las Vegas, Phoenix, Tucson, Los Angeles, San Diego, Denver, Salt Lake City, all of them drawing from a river that this spring has seen its mountain snowpack essentially erased weeks ahead of schedule by the record March heat wave. The March 2026 heat wave was probably the most statistically and meteorologically extreme heat event that has occurred in the southwestern U.S. for as long as we have kept rigorous records of extreme heat events. More than 7,000 daily temperature records and roughly 2,000 monthly records fell. 17 states saw their hottest March temperature on record. The heat wave was virtually impossible without human-caused climate change, according to rapid attribution studies from Climate Central and World Weather Attribution. 7,000 daily temperature records, 2,000 monthly records, 17 states with their hottest March ever, all in one event, in March, the month that should still be winter in most of the West. On March 20th, the previous U.S. national heat record of 108 degrees Fahrenheit for the month of March was broken with a temperature of 112 degrees at Buttercup and Squaw Lake in California. NOAA reported that the contiguous U.S. average temperature in March 2026 was 5, 2 degrees Celsius, 9, 4 degrees Fahrenheit, above the 20th century average, the warmest March in the 132-year record. The year from April 2025 to March 2026 was the warmest ever recorded for the contiguous U.S. in records since 1895, and January through March 2026 was the driest on record for the contiguous U.S., the warmest 12-month period in 131 years of records, and the driest January-March in 131 years of records, simultaneously. The atmosphere over this country has been running hot and dry for a full year, breaking records not just for a season, but for a sustained 12-month period that has no precedent in the modern record. That is what "we haven't seen this in over a year" actually means in full context. We haven't seen drought conditions at anything close to this level since before most of us were born. The last time the Palmer Drought Index was anywhere near where it is now, not counting the 2 Dust Bowl months of 1934, was during the great droughts of the early 21st century. By 2012, 2/3 of the lower 48 states were in drought. Many began to speculate it was as severe as the drought episodes of the 1930s and 1950s. The 3 longest drought episodes on record each covered 60% or more of the contiguous United States and lasted 29 months or longer. We exceeded 2012's drought coverage, and we did it by April. 2012 took most of the year to get to 2/3 coverage. We hit 61% in April and are still climbing. I want to talk specifically about where this drought leads in practical terms, because the summer implications of what is happening right now to the American landscape are severe, and they are not getting adequate public attention. Scientists warn that extreme conditions could continue and cause water shortages and raging wildfires this summer. A March 23rd study in Environmental Research Letters found that in years with earlier snowmelt in the west, wildfires generally burned more acres, but the heat has set the stage for this summer's imminent risks. Earlier snowmelt means more dried-out vegetation by the time fire season peaks in July and August. The mountain snowpack that normally keeps high-elevation forests moist through June and into July has already been largely consumed by the record March heat wave. Those forests are now entering May with moisture levels more typical of late July, and fire responds to heat and drought exponentially, not linearly. As UCLA hydroclimatologist Park Williams said, fire tends to respond to heat and drought in an exponential manner. Between the beginning of January and the end of March, the percentage of the U.S. landscape facing the worst drought conditions increased to 15% of the country from 2%, according to the U.S. Drought Monitor. The Drought Severity and Coverage Index hit its most severe first quarter level since at least 2000. Conditions are likely to worsen across the West according to NOAA's Spring Weather Outlook, which cites low snowpack, below average precipitation, and above average temperatures expected through June, from 2% to 15% of the country in the worst drought conditions in a single quarter. That is a 7-fold increase in 3 months. And NOAA's Spring Outlook says conditions are likely to worsen through June. Wildfires have been intense, burning more than 6 million acres in the first quarter of 2026 nationally. The extreme conditions in the first quarter of 2026 reflect climate change at work. Even though weather forecasts predicted the March heat wave would smash records, scientists were stunned as some local temperatures soared up to 30 degrees Fahrenheit above normal. More than 100 daily temperature records were broken across 235 U.S. cities in March. 6 million acres burned in the first quarter alone, more than double the 10-year average for the same period. And fire season has not even started yet. The traditional peak of Western fire season runs from June through September. What we have burned through April is the warm-up. The communities I am most concerned about heading into summer are the ones that sit at the wildland-urban interface, places where residential development meets forests, grasslands, and chaparral. In California, that list is endless. Paradise was rebuilt and sits in one of the most fire-prone counties in the state. The communities of the Sierra Nevada foothills, the suburbs of Boise and Reno, the Front Range communities of Colorado, the communities of southern Arizona and New Mexico, all of them are heading into summer with less snowpack buffer, drier vegetation, and drought-stressed soils than they had in any recent year. And I want to mention something specific about Georgia and the Southeast, because the wildfire story there is not going away when May arrives. The drought in the Southeast is so severe that it would take 19 inches of rain in 1 month to break the drought in eastern Texas, and more than a foot to solve the deficit for most of the Southeast. That rainfall is not coming in May. It is not coming in June. The wildfire risk in Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Florida, and across the Deep South is going to persist through the summer, even as the active tornado pattern potentially shifts elsewhere. Now, I want to come back to the severe weather side of this story. because there's a connection between the tornado season and the drought that I don't think gets made often enough. And it starts with a specific tornado that made history less than a year ago. On June 20th, 2025, a monster tornado with peak winds topping 210 mph hit Enderlin, North Dakota. Prior to this event, the last EF5 tornado had struck more than 12 years earlier in Moore, Oklahoma on May 20th, 2013. The Enderlin tornado ended a highly publicized record-long drought of top-end tornadoes, 12 years. That is how long the United States went without confirming an EF5 tornado. From Moore, Oklahoma in 2013 to Enderlin, North Dakota in June 2025. 12 years and 1 month. A drought of violent tornadoes so long that researchers published academic papers trying to explain it. And now look at where we are today. The Enid, Oklahoma EF4 with 175 mph winds is the strongest U.S. tornado since that Enderlin EF5, just 10 months ago. The 2026 spring season has already produced EF3 tornadoes through Kankakee, Illinois, Rochester, Minnesota, and Wausau, Wisconsin. The season's tornado count is running nearly 100 above the long-term average pace through late April, and we have not yet entered the historically most active week of the entire tornado calendar, the week of May 19th through 26th. The number of billion-dollar severe storms set a new record in 2025, with 21 such events, reflecting near-record numbers of damaging high wind and tornado reports during spring and summer 2025. $21 billion severe storm events in a single year, a new record. And 2026 is tracking to challenge or exceed that number. The April 17-18 outbreak alone, 80 tornadoes, the EF3 through Kankakee killing 1 person, will likely be classified as a billion-dollar disaster. The Enid EF4 event and the broader April 22 to 28 sequence will almost certainly be another, and the season is not done. The Los Angeles wildfires of January 2025 were the most costly event of 2025, and the country's most costly wildfires on record at 61. $2 billion in damage, about twice as costly as the previous record wildfire, twice as costly as any previous wildfire in American history, in January 2025. And 14 months later, the conditions that produced them, drought, dry vegetation, anomalous heat, Santa Ana winds, are being reproduced across a much larger portion of the country simultaneously. The past 3 years rank highest for the annual number of billion-dollar disasters on record, 2023, 2024, and 2025. In that order, each year worse than the last. And 2026 is setting up to challenge all three. Now I need to bring in the piece of the story that ties everything together and tells us where this is all heading. Because the drought, the heat wave, the active tornado season, the building wildfire risk, they are all connected to a single large-scale oceanic shift that is unfolding right now in the tropical Pacific. And the comparison that the scientists are making is not a recent year. It's not 2015. It's not 1997. It's 1972. When comparing the subsurface heat of 2026 to past Super El Niño events, the comparison most closely resembles 1972-73, especially when the time delay is taken into account. Unlike the two most recent Super El Niño events, we are just coming off a weak La Niña, so there is some catch-up to do in terms of time. But it is remarkable how fast the 2026 signal is catching up, boosted by strong westerly wind bursts. The latest forecast data also reflects these massive oceanic and atmospheric changes, and shows an even stronger signal for the new El Niño event than previous model runs. The forecasts indicate this could be the strongest in decades, potentially surpassing the peak intensity of the 1983, 1997, and 2015 El Niño events late this year, potentially surpassing 1983, 1997, and 2015. 3 of the 4 strongest El Niño events in the modern record, all of them in consideration as comparison events for what is currently building in the Pacific. Let me tell you what 1972 and 73 El Niño did. The 1972 to 73 El Niño was, at the time, the strongest on record. It collapsed the Peruvian anchovy fishery, one of the largest in the world, causing a global protein shortage that contributed to food price spikes worldwide. It disrupted monsoons across Asia and Africa. It triggered severe droughts in parts of the Soviet Union and Australia. And in the United States, it contributed to the incredibly active 1973 tornado season, including the infamous Union City, Oklahoma tornado of May 24th, 1973, the most scientifically studied tornado in history, which revolutionized tornado research and was a direct factor in the development of the modern Doppler radar warning system. The World Meteorological Organization has issued a statement confirming that climate models are strongly aligned with high confidence in the onset of El Niño, followed by further intensification in the months that follow. Sea surface temperatures in the equatorial Pacific are rising rapidly, pointing to a likely return of El Niño conditions as early as May through July 2026. High confidence, May through July. The WMO, the United Nations Official Weather Organization, in high confidence agreement with NOAA, ECMWF, and the Australian Bureau of Meteorology that El Niño is coming. It is coming soon, and it is going to intensify. The El Niño probability jumped from 62% to 85 to 94% in just 3 weeks. ECMWF and NOAA put the chance of a strong event at 80%. If El Niño rockets toward Super El Niño territory by fall, expect global temperature records to fall in late 2026 and especially 2027. The May ENSO diagnostic will be the first real signal of how strong this event will get. The May ENSO diagnostic. That report will be released in the next few weeks. And it will be, in many ways, the most important single weather and climate document published in 2026, because it will tell us whether the 25% probability of Super El Niño is moving toward 35%, toward 50%, or whether the signal is stabilizing toward a merely strong event. That distinction matters enormously for the hurricane season, for the winter of 2026-27, and for whether 2026 goes down in history as the year the world's weather was fundamentally reorganized again. I want to spend a few minutes on something that I think is genuinely not on most people's radar, even among people who follow weather closely, because the drought and heat and wildfire story has a direct, practical kitchen table consequence that is going to affect every single American, regardless of where they live or whether they've ever seen a tornado. Food prices. Meteorologists said the record drought is a bad sign for wildfire season. Food prices and Western water issues. It would take 19 inches of rain in 1 month to break the drought in eastern Texas, and more than a foot of rain to solve the deficit for most of the southeast. Texas is one of the most important cattle-producing states in the country. When drought reaches the severity currently measured across eastern Texas and the southern plains, ranchers face a stark choice: sell off their herds because they cannot afford the feed, or pay dramatically inflated hay prices to keep them through the summer. Either way, the long-term productive capacity of the cattle industry takes a hit. Either way, beef prices rise, and those price increases flow through the entire food chain, affecting everything from the ground beef at your grocery store to the fast food dollar menu to the restaurant you haven't been to in a while because everything is already too expensive. Scientists warn that extreme conditions could cause water shortages, food prices, impacts, and raging wildfires. The extreme conditions in the first quarter of 2026 reflect the kind of setup that drives commodity price spikes. The drought in the West is affecting winter wheat, the same crop that becomes bread flour, pasta, and baked goods. The drought in the Southeast is stressing cotton, peanuts, tobacco, and the pine forests that produce lumber and paper. The drought in the southern plains is affecting cattle, sorghum, and hay. Multiple food and commodity supply chains, all under simultaneous stress from the same drought event. This is not abstract macroeconomics. This is the kind of supply shock that produces the 40 to 50% grocery price increases that people remember for decades. The kind that gets named, the kind that becomes a political issue. And it is building right now in the same spring that is producing the tornado outbreaks, the flood emergencies, and the Georgia wildfire declarations, all at the same time, all from the same underlying pattern. I want to come back to the immediate term weather situation because I don't want anyone to walk away from this video thinking that the severe weather threat is over while the drought story builds in the background. The WPC's extended forecast through May the 2nd confirms that heavy rain and runoff and severe weather threats from the Arklatex to the Tennessee Valley Tuesday may be followed by additional heavy rainfall and runoff potential across the south-central U.S. and also with a New England coastal low to monitor for Thursday and Friday. Today, Tuesday's system is still working through the Arklatex and Tennessee Valley with flash flooding potential from training thunderstorms. Thursday and Friday bring a new system targeting the south-central U.S., Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, where the ground is simultaneously drought-stricken and at flash flood risk, because drought soil does not absorb intense rainfall. It repels it. As National Geographic atmospheric scientists explained, communities dealing with severe drought are paradoxically at higher risk of flash flooding when intense rainfall does arrive, because drought-hardened soil is less permeable than moist soil. Water runs off parched ground faster than it runs off saturated soil, concentrating rapidly in low-lying areas and stream channels. Flash floods in a drought. It sounds contradictory. It isn't. It is one of the most well-documented meteorological phenomena in climatology. The drought bakes the soil into a near-impermeable surface. When a 3-inch-per-hour thunderstorm arrives, the water has nowhere to go. It sheets off the hardened ground and concentrates in streets, drainages, and creeks with extraordinary speed. This is the specific scenario facing communities in southeastern Georgia, northern Florida, eastern Texas, and the Mississippi Delta over the next several days. Not enough rain to break the drought, nowhere near enough, but enough rain falling fast enough onto soil dry enough to produce dangerous and fast-rising flash flooding. The worst of both worlds. The drought continues underneath, the flood risk arrives on top. For anyone in those communities, monitor weather alerts through the end of this week. Flash flood watches and warnings can be issued rapidly when intense storms train over drought-hardened soil. And the most dangerous moment is the first heavy rain after an extended dry period, when the ground is maximally impermeable and the drainage systems are maximally dry, and therefore can fill dramatically fast. Here's where we stand. Wednesday, April 28th, 2026. The Palmer Drought Severity Index hit its highest level for March since 1895, ranking as the third driest month ever recorded, bested only by the Dust Bowl months of July and August 1934. 92 years. That is how long it has been since American soil was this dry in the spring. January through March 2026 was the driest first quarter in 131 years of records. The previous record was set in 1910, a record that had stood for 116 years. 17 states saw their hottest March temperature on record. The national average for March was 9, 4 degrees Fahrenheit above the 20th century average, the warmest March in 132 years. Over 61% of the lower 48 is in moderate to exceptional drought. 97% of the southeast, 2/3 of the west. 19 inches of rain in 1 month needed just to break the eastern Texas drought. Georgia is under a wildfire state of emergency for 91 counties. More than 6 million acres have burned nationally in the first quarter, more than double the 10-year average. And El Niño is building in the Pacific at a pace that climate scientists are comparing to 1972, potentially the most significant ENSO event in decades, with the WMO confirming high confidence in its onset by summer. And running through all of this, the severe weather season continues. The storm train carrying Tuesday's flooding threat, Thursday's south-central system, and the continued active pattern through the first week of May, on top of a landscape that is simultaneously baking and flooding, drought-stricken and flash flood-prone, bone-dry and storm-battered. Climate change is injecting more heat into the atmosphere and ocean system. Heat is energy, which means there is more energy to power extreme weather events, particularly heat waves, droughts, and storms, that would have been virtually impossible in the 20th century. Since climate change is also fundamentally disrupting atmospheric circulation patterns, we now have mega unprecedented extreme events occurring with regularity. Not as once-in-a-generation anomalies, with regularity. We haven't seen this in over a year. In some of these categories, we haven't seen it in a decade, in some in our lifetimes. And in the one that matters most, the drought severity approaching Dust Bowl levels, we haven't seen it since 1934. That is not a forecast. That is where we already are right now, today. Stay safe, stay aware, and stay connected, because this story is far from over.